Welcome to the latest installment of Brand Brothers. I'm Doug.
And I'm Johnny. Today we're talking about startups and the power of visual content.
All right, let's get to it.
So let's start with this. When people think of branding, they sometimes just think of a logo. But you're saying that logo isn't necessarily the brand.
The logo is definitely not the brand. The brand is much greater than that. So a logo is something that's more along the lines of a screwdriver in a toolbox, right? So it's good for some things, but not for everything. You don't use if you're a normal person, you don't use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, right? So the big idea when it comes to a brand is it's not just the visual, it's the verbal as well. So you need to focus on both your messaging and your visual identity. And your visual identity, again, it's not just the logo, it's your color palette, it's your typography, it's your patterns, and so on. But one thing that I've definitely noticed is that a lot of startups specifically struggle with crafting a brand story that just feels generic, right? So from your experience, and I know that you've started up a lot of companies, how can a new company create an authentic story that resonates with its audiences?
Well, it's a really valid question. It's really hard to do. And I can only tell you from my experience that we typically started with the logo first. I mean, we started with a name first. And I think that's probably what a lot of companies do, is that they come up with a name or an idea for a name, and then they start searching for domain names that are available. It seems like
that definitely happens a lot these days, more than
right.
Certainly in the early 90s, for sure.
Sure. And then, and we had all those domain name, what did they call them? The guys who bought all the domains. And
squatters.
Squatters,
right?
Yeah,
Yes.
That's the name. So, So beyond just the domain name and the name of the company, then you have to come up with some sort of visual identity. And usually within my realm, I've been dealing with tech startups. So tech startups, the very first thing you do is put up a website, which is why you need the domain name, and then you need a logo. But beyond that, we didn't have money to hire an agency. We didn't. This is pre-funding. And so once you get funding, you can take it a step further. And that's exactly what we did. We got, we came up with a name and a logo. We built a website. We built a PowerPoint. And then we went out and tried to raise money, and we were successful in that. And then you take it to the next step. And that's when we brought in an agency and actually revisited our logo, realized all the ways that our logo wasn't working, why it wasn't working. It doesn't work, in reverse, or it doesn't work in a box, or it doesn't.
Sure, but you started up a bunch of companies, right?
Yep.
So you would learn from your mistakes along the way. Was there ever a point in time where authentic storytelling was a thing for you, or did that really become more prevalent when really your startups became huge, right?
Yeah.
Pre-acquisition, and started working with agencies? Like, where along the way would you find that the storytelling became interwoven into your overarching startup brands?
It sort of evolved naturally because we were building a community, and in both the brands that I was involved with. My role was more in the developer outreach and building a developer community. And that was sort of our brand story with Tropo. That was, we were one and the same as our developer community, because we were a platform for developers.
Yeah, for the Cisco developers, right? Exactly.
Yeah, well, eventually we became a Cisco.
Yeah, of course. And to that end, what did you discover were some of the best platforms, your best ways to reach your audiences?
obviously web was one, but we did a multi-pronged approach. We did a lot of hackathon type events. We did a lot of events in live events in all around the world. But primarily we engage with them via the web and a little bit with blog posts. We used some social media as well, but I would say our strongest in that particular realm was our in person events. But
Well, nothing beats in person, right? When it
yeah,
when it comes to creating a brand that has an authentic experience, that in-person human touch, nothing can really beat it.
one of the interesting things that happened when we launched Tropo, we had one brand identity, and when I came in, we were in the midst of trying to take it to a different direction.
This sounds familiar.
Yeah, because that's when you and I were working together. But one of the things that we were trying to deal with was the consistency of the brand. We went from like a cloudy type thing to we wanted to get more enterprisey, and so how did you help maintain the consistency?
Right.
Getting like you kind of guided us in that.
I did, along with Simon and
Yeah.
and the rest of our staff here at Remix. So the key to consistency kind of takes me back to what we were talking about just moments ago regarding visual identity. That it's not just the logo, it's the colors, and it's the typefaces, and it's the patterns and textures, along with the visual language. There was also the verbal language, right? So what we tried to do was make it so anytime we were doing any sort of marketing, and it could have been in person, right, with your exhibit graphics, it could have been online with just your typical UX, the typefaces, the color palettes, those were all consistent. And we tried to maintain a degree of consistency with the way that the logo was presented as well, making it so there were brand standards that would go out. Like, for example, when you were sponsoring an event, you'd have to provide them a logo. Well, providing them a logo doesn't make sure that your logo appears how you want it to appear.
I learned that the hard way many times that you just by you can't trust anyone with your logo. Because you can guarantee that if it doesn't fit in somebody else's mind and how in their design, they will change it.
I don't know what you're talking about. As a designer, I've never done that, ever. Okay, maybe a few times. So you had just mentioned about the in-person stuff, and it's so true how effective it is. So building a brand isn't just about visuals, right? It's also about building communities. What are some effective ways for startups to engage with their audience beyond just posting on social media?
Well, it's so easy to fall into that trap because social media is easy to do, right? So you can do
For some people, yes.
well. I'm saying that there's very little barrier to entry. Anybody who has access to the social media account can post something. So it's easy to think, oh, I did 3 posts this week. I did 2 blogs and I did a couple tweets or Facebook posts, and that checks the box for your community engagement for the week. We would, on top of that, organize events. We'd organize meetups. We'd organize drink ups. Really, like doing a multi-pronged approach to. We also organized contests. Developer contests, and all of these things to try to engage our audience to use our platform. And it's speaking of that, visual content has been a huge driver in marketing lately. And what visuals do you think are more effective in
Wow, what a question.
Yeah,
So
because plain text doesn't always, you can get your messaging off over with plain text, but what are your, what can you do visually?
So there are a bunch of different things that can be done from a visual communications perspective, and just like social media, creating graphics that are enticing, it could be as simple as and we've seen these before, and it's a little bit hokey, where it's a famous quote or it's a quote from someone famous, uh, and the bigger idea, the underlying idea is that that quote, for example, would reflect your ethos as a company, and it would be dual purpose. That second purpose is about awareness generation, right? Then we can take it one step further, and that's with infographics. So we'll take a key series of data and present that as pertinent information to a customer's audiences. And so the first way, of course, it's lovely to have a static graphic, but the second and more effective way is to convert those static graphics into video and animated components, especially when you're putting that stuff on social media, because we know that things like Reels and TikTok are far more effective than even a carousel ad. And we know that carousels are basically second to video content.
Um, we were talking a little bit about the how other people will change your logo, and I was just thinking about the idea of the brand guidelines, which you kind of introduced me to, the idea that there's sort of rules and restrictions that
Yes,
get
we call it a brand Bible sometimes. Yes.
brain Bible. I kind of I both appreciated it, but I also found it restrictive.
Restrictive, sure.
Yeah. So talk to me about where they're appropriate, why you use them.
So brand guidelines or brand guide or house style guide, whatever terminology you use, like I said, brand Bible, they are intentionally restrictive to make sure that a brand is presented in what I refer to as the 3 C's, that it's cohesive, coherent, and consistent. It also increases legibility, right? So you don't want your logo, for example, to be placed on a busy background, because then your logo gets gobbled up. You don't want your typefaces to be presented in a different color palette that doesn't reflect the tone of your brand, right? You don't want to introduce pink and purple when your colors are blue and gray. They're obviously disparate. And so what this does is it helps to make certain that your tone is put forward in an effective way and in a positive light. And the other key reason that we have these guidelines is because it's not always one person that's working on your marketing materials. Oftentimes they're teams. And even beyond that, you have multiple different groups that are working on it. So you have your internal marketing department, for example. You have your West Coast agency and your East Coast agency as a possibility. And then on top of that, you're relying on vendors sometimes to put together content, right? You might be working with a vendor who takes care of all of your SEM and who takes care of all of your social media marketing, specifically the paid side. And so you provide them your brand assets, including photography, and along with all of your logo elements, your brand elements. And you want to make sure that that's consistent. Whatever it is that they're creating, you want to make sure that that is in line and in tune with the other stuff that you're creating. And one thing that I've noticed, and I if you'll forgive me, I want to get back to the idea of startups. I find that startups tend to struggle with where to focus their marketing efforts. And if a startup has limited resources, like I know you certainly have experienced the beginnings and the ends of a startup, where you have an infinitesimal amount of resources all the way up to now you're supported by a Fortune 100 company. What have been the best ways to prioritize online presence and engagements?
So the key that I've always found, and what, when you're dealing with a limited budget and you're sort of guerrilla marketing something yourself, consistently touching your audience, so updating your content regularly is sort of a given. You have to do that. That's like the bare baseline, because if somebody goes to your blog or your Facebook page, your whatever, wherever you have an online presence, and you don't have recent relevant content, they're more likely to just move on to somebody else that might look like they're actively participating with their audience. So I think the key there is to make sure that that you're regularly updating your content, and also keeping up with what's going on in your space is critical. There are always changes, and no matter what vertical you're in, there's always new technology, there's always new competition, there's always news, new regulations. Anything that affects your particular sector is something that you should actively participate in, and you don't necessarily need to respond to anything or have a position on everything, but at least be aware of it and make sure that all of your online content is sort of reflected in how you're proceeding.
It almost sounds like you're suggesting maybe a holistic content marketing strategy.
Well, I mean, that would be the optimal thing. So when you aspire to have a holistic, here's the thing: most startups don't have the bandwidth to do that, and so it definitely helps. And when I had a bigger budget and was able to address things across the board in all the aspects that we were sending out our messages, it was a lot easier because, again, that consistency. What the three C's?
Consistent, coherent, and cohesive.
I'm gonna have to to steal that one. So we got, I'm gonna go back to the video side of things. And one thing I've noticed, we have Facebook Reels, we've got TikTok stories, or TikTok, just
right,
general.
TikTok and Instagram.
Well, they have their own stories too now. So
do
within
they?
TikTok,
oh man,
yeah.
See, we're both learning new things today.
And we got Instagram stories, and they've kind of changed this we call it short form content, and a lot. I'm seeing more and more companies kind of dive into this as a way of getting their messaging out. But how do you manage video content and while maintaining your 3 C's and also keeping within a budget?
It's funny. I didn't intentionally bring up content marketing strategy, but it's pretty clear that the answer to your question is to have a proactive content marketing strategy. So, like you said, startups specifically tend not to have the bandwidth, and even smaller SMBs, right? Like there are plenty of 5 to 10 person companies that generally believe they don't have the bandwidth necessary to implement a proactive content marketing strategy. But if you take the time to develop the materials and to develop a mode for getting the content out there, then you have the ability to be a little bit more effective.
Can real quick before you go on to the next, I wanted to ask you about content marketing, because I know what I think it is, but I want to hear what you think it is.
Oh gosh. See, this is setting me up for potentially being completely wrong. So generally speaking, it's marketing through the use of content, right? So I'm just going to completely distill it down to its bare bones, and really the words, right?
Should we open the Webster's dictionary? It defines content marketing as
so when it comes to content marketing, generally it's done digitally, right? So like you had mentioned previously, you have your blog posts, which we're moving away from the terminology of it being called the blog post and more toward articles.
Or
yes.
just post. Yeah.
So it depends.
Right.
Because sometimes these articles even live in knowledge bases, right? And KBs can still be used as part of a content strategy. So the big idea here is to not only create relevance from the perspective of generating content that is meaningful today, it's also about distributing that content. And then in that distribution, you're gaining eyeballs, right? You're telling people that you just posted an article. You're telling people that you just posted a video. You're telling people that you're doing something, and the big idea is creating awareness. Now, the next step is a call to action. So it's not just posting on Facebook or posting on Instagram or TikTok or what have you. It's getting the message out to all of your various audiences on a variety of platforms. And ultimately, that just means making sure that your content is adequately marketed.
You mentioned call to action, or CTA, and one of the things that you and I always joke with you about is that when things get too markety,
yes,
it kind of turns me off. And part of that comes from my background as a developer evangelist, that learning very quickly that most developers don't want to be marketed to, and well, I think it's true of most people in general. Don't want to feel like they're getting marketed to, despite the fact that we are bombarded by marketing from every direction.
Yeah, it's 100% true.
How do you balance that sort of the desire to put in a CTA without feeling like you're being too markety?
So you need to understand who your audience is for each individual platform. And when I say platform, I'm not just referring to social media, right? So on YouTube, for example, we are already programmed to accept people saying like and subscribe. But we would laugh at those same people, which we might kind of laugh at them on YouTube. But it's expected. Again, it's expected on YouTube. But if I said that on Facebook, for example, I would definitely get laughed at. So
by the way, if you're watching this, I would like you to like and subscribe.
And if you're not watching this and listening to it on a podcast, make sure to hit 5 stars. I love this show, or whatever it is.
Yeah, give us a review.
That was very subtle. So yeah, how do you avoid coming across as smarmy? And I think the answer is just being authentic, right? So yes, people want you to tell them what you want out of it. But if you are going to a platform specifically to get something out of it that people don't want there, you're barking up the wrong tree. Is that the right term? I don't even know.
I think so. Yeah, I've noticed that, like, specifically, Reddit is very anti-marketing. Although now that they're public, they're dipping their toes into selling ads and stuff like that. And it's very interesting to watch that the entire Reddit community sort of react negatively, but also they don't really have a choice but to embrace it, because Reddit has evolved as a brand,
and it supports the platform that we get to enjoy for free.
That's true.
So that's just how it's augmented.
So to sort of wind us down, what do you see? What kind of trends do you see emerging in your sort of the amazing Crespin?
The amazing Crespin, right?
Yeah.
So if I had the ability to look into a crystal ball, I think this is actually not that complicated, because we talked about this recently, and it is about focusing on impending target audiences. that's what we can do. That's the trend that's coming forward. And that trend is coming across, just like I mentioned, in the form of authenticity, right? So Gen Z is our next set of consumers. Some of them are already adults. Some of them are already buying cars and houses. And so the emerging trend is simply for brands, especially startups, right, to embrace the idea of authenticity. Don't pretend you're something you're not, right? If you're a startup, act like a startup, because people who want to give their money to a startup rather than a chain or a franchise, you're going to be the beneficiary there, as opposed to coming across as a Fortune 500 company that looks like you have deep pockets.
Now, real quick, just one last thing.
I thought we were winding down.
I thought we were too, but I just had, we've been talking about content marketing. We've been talking about that. We're talking about these trends. Obviously, it's hard to ignore AI, and so tell me your vision of content marketing and how it relates to like these new AI engines that are replacing many of the search engines, right? So how do you, what's the new SEO?
Well, the new SEO is definitely, there are a couple different terms at the moment. None have really risen to the top. AIO or LLMO, I've heard so far. Throw some letters together, and that's what we're dealing with.
I don't like LLMO because it's not a TLA. It's not a three-letter.
It's not a three-letter acronym.
Yeah.
So yeah, AIO. And still it comes down to authenticity, right? Write about the things that matter to you. Write about the things that you believe matter for your audiences, and then let AI take care of the rest. However, let me back up a little bit there, because that sounded like, oh, AI will take care of it. So no, that's not the idea. I do believe that AI has a place. It's a tool, right? It's not a solution. I think there's a big difference there. A lot of people are trying to use it as a solution. But we've discussed this previously, that AI might get you 80% of the way there. It's not going to get you 100% of the way there. And frankly, I don't think it ever will, because AI will never quite comprehend the je ne sais quoi of human reactions and responses.
Well, I'm talking about more in the.
Oh man, I totally misunderstood the question.
Well, no, more in the search side of it, not the AI as a tool. Well, I mean AI as a search tool, I guess.
Right. So it's important to, with regard to content marketing, position yourself as a thought leader. And part of that is because over time, the articles that you publish and other media that you publish, if you allow it to be, it'll be crawled by these LLMs, right? So Perplexity is going to see it, and Chat GPT is going to see it, and now Copilot is going to see it, and Claude is seeing
Gemini,
it. Exactly, yeah, Google's product. And so, it is going to replace search engines, the traditional search engine as we know it. And so it's going to be just as important, like we had SEO 10 years ago, where it was important. It was critically important. It's still important, don't get me wrong, but it's more important to future-proof yourself. And to future-proof yourself would be to embrace these LLMs that are crawling your content.
I think that's a good stopping point. Thank you for joining us here at Brand of Brothers. My name is Johnny Diggz.
And I'm Doug, without a last name.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Brand of Brothers. A big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Remix, the branding agency, along with production assistance from Johnny Diggz, Simon Jacobson, and me, Doug Berger. We can't forget music by PRO. Speaking of not forgetting, remember to do that like and subscribe thing, and find us at brandshowlive.com and follow us on the socials at Brand Show Live.